Michael Brooks, the director of Hillel, the creator of this award, and the inspiration for this evening. So thank you very much. I mean, Professor Williams, of course, is the inspiration. But without Michael Brooks here tonight, without his help to get us all together, he was basically the link for the students to come together tonight. So please welcome Michael Brooks.
Gosh, the last time I was introduced so beautifully, so warmly, and so aptly was the time that the person who was supposed to introduce me didn't show up and I had to introduce myself. I am tempted to say a rich welcome to you all, but I can't get away with saying things like that. Sponsors rarely get an opportunity to tell people why they elected to put their resources and their energy behind a particular program. There are, in fact, 15 sponsors of tonight's event. One of them was left off the list, and I'd like you to take out your pens right now, please, and write in your program, Student Alumni Council. Really, it's very important because they are the only sponsor that has been left off the program and the poster 2 years in a row. They were not only there in creation, as it were, but we very much want their support next year. Now, as executive director of Hillel, it is really a special pleasure for me to be able to bring greetings on behalf of all of the sponsors, not only because I had a hand in starting this, but because I really feel that profoundly that this is a very important gesture for the entire university. Apple Computer signed on almost immediately as a corporate sponsor, not just because they liked the name, although I will tell you, if you're ever putting together a proposal, put the word Apple in it. It's amazing how quickly that gets their attention. But also because they really share with all of the other sponsors a deep commitment to excellence. And this evening's program celebrates, I believe, in addition to other very important things, true excellence. But there's more. This program not only celebrates great teaching and excellence, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge to a professor chosen by the students at the University of Michigan to deliver his or her last lecture. That is to say, the lecture that the teacher would want to give if this really were the last hour. We hope that, of course, that it's not. It almost was in the case of Drew Weston, as you know, he's now teaching at Harvard. And it is a real challenge, and the principle behind this really emerged from an observation and a conviction. The observation was that at almost any university that I've ever studied at, and I'm embarrassed to tell you how many that has been, the best lecture in any course is either the first lecture, and the quality of the first lecture seems to be related somehow to the length of the drop-out period, or the last lecture, by which time the professor figures, look, I really can't cover any more material, I better explain what it really means, what it's all about. The conviction was my conviction, which I managed to infect the original organizers of this with. The conviction that anyone with something to say can probably tells 90% of it in 1 hour. The other 10% takes years to kind of dribble out, and that's how we earn a living, or at least get tenure. Now, when universities began in the Middle Ages, books were at a premium, and professors would come in to read from their very valuable and precious notes to students who would pay for the privilege of copying them down. Traditions die very hard, and while some professors on the relative scale probably aren't making much more than they did in the 12th century, the fact is that students pay considerably more for the privilege of participating in this very expensive transcription service. While our great university really is blessed with an extraordinary number of outstanding teachers, witness the scores of names that were submitted in nomination for this award. Even here, the word academic is often preceded by the word merely, all too often. Academic has come to mean something that is of no real importance, no great lasting significance. And that should be a danger signal to all of us. The challenge to a professor, of course, is not just to lecture tonight, but to profess. And while preaching, I'm sure, is not appropriate to the university, and frankly, I'm not sure it's appropriate anywhere else either, those of us who earn our livings by talking may finally come around to appreciating the need for real professionalism, particularly when we confront the possibility on any given day, any given hour, it may be the last hour of our academic careers in which we have a chance to say what we think is really important. One of my own great teachers, one who really professed, is known to all of his students to this day, not by the title professor, but by the title of Rabbi, my master. His name was Eliezer. He lived at a time when people didn't have last names. And I'll never forget the first time I studied his words in the Babylonian Talmud, where I heard him say, as he has been saying every day for the last 1,800 years, Shuv yom echad lifnei mitatcha, turn yourself around, turn your life around one day before you die. Of course, what he meant by this was that since we don't know when we're going to die, we should do that every day. And it's really in the spirit of that teaching that this golden lecture, the golden apple lecture, maybe I'm wishful thinking here, golden apple lecture emerged. The idea was that all of us who teach should probably say what we have to really say at least 1 hour before we stop teaching. And there's a challenge to those of us who are students as well. That's all of us. A challenge to ask the questions that really need to be asked, to say the things that really need to be said, and to hear the things that really need to be heard while there's still time. In sponsoring tonight's program, we sponsors are saying something as well, and learning something as well through this gesture about what really matters in the academy, in the workplace, and in our community. We hope that this evening will inspire all of us once again to the challenge of really being here, wherever here is. Not just for the first hour, not just for the last hour, but for all the hours in between. On behalf of all of the sponsors, I want to thank you for giving us the privilege of helping to make this happen.
Selected out of the many colleagues who could praise Ralph Williams' teaching at this Golden Apple lecture, because I'm the one who's taught a course with him most recently on editorial theory. It is an unsettling experience to team teach a course with someone who knows 6 times as many languages as you do, who has apparently read everything written in those languages and quoted by heart in the original, and who has already thought through complex issues that had never even occurred to you before. To adapt Coleridge's remark on Plato, everywhere I go in my mind, I meet Ralph on his way back. But it is not merely Ralph Williams' fabled erudition and eloquence that make him a good teacher. It is also his great concern, both for his subject matter and for his students. Put simply, he loves them both. Whether dealing with a crucial passage in Isaiah, with the ending of King Lear, or with a complex point in literary theory, Ralph shows that devotion and concern that bespeak a deeper emotional engagement. So too with the generous time he devotes to students, whether counseling them on matters large or small, on what to do with their lives, or what to do with the last paragraph of their essays, Ralph continually recreates what the poet Wordsworth called that best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. And he does so not with self-display, but rather with self-effacement. As we read in Ralph's favorite book, love vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked. This combination of erudition and love, then, make Ralph an especially fit recipient for this year's Golden Apple Award in recognition of undergraduate teaching. Ralph's favorite phrase in the course we taught together was cultural transmission, and both terms are important to him. It is important to him that we study and absorb the great achievements of various cultures in the past, but it is equally important that those cultures be transmitted in living form, that they be real and be relevant for our own time. Ezra Pound expressed that idea in an adaptation of the Chinese sage Confucius when he adopted the phrase, "make it new," as his motto. So that Ralph never addresses merely the accomplishments of the past. He addresses our own personal capacities so that we may create the accomplishments of the present and of the future as well. That human pertinence should always be the point of a university, whether of its research or of its teaching. Those of you interested in how that pertinence informs Ralph's own scholarship will have the opportunity to do so in his forthcoming book from University of Michigan Press, entitled Palimpsest, Editorial Theory in the Humanities. But we are here tonight to hear and see how that pertinence informs Ralph Williams' teaching is embodied in his imaginary last lecture. I would be grief-stricken were this really the last opportunity to hear my distinguished colleague and friend lecture. But I am delighted that the Golden Apple Award provides another, and I hope far from last, opportunity to do so. Ralph, congratulations on the award which you are about to receive, and thank you for enriching our lives by the values that you incarnate so well.
It's my honor to introduce the 1992 recipient of the Golden Apple Award. Professor Ralph Williams is one of the most respected and admired professors here at Michigan, and this recognition is well deserved. Professor Williams teaches undergraduates in many departments, and he brings an enthusiasm to his subjects which affects every student. Whether he is reciting from Dante's Divine Comedy, teaching about Christianity and introductory religion, reading from Genesis, or speaking about Primo Levi and the Holocaust, Williams comes alive in the classroom and brings all assembled with him as he journeys into a text. Professor Williams understands what a teacher is supposed to be and do, and he helps students to understand and define their own roles. On the first day of a class about Holocaust literature, Professor Williams waved a stack of overrides above his head and quietly announced that he believed that every one of us has a responsibility to learn about the Holocaust. He then offered a space in the class to anyone who wanted to study the subject with him. And indeed, to take a class with Williams is to explore the subject as well as oneself. This dedication, commitment, and enthusiasm are among the reasons why Professor Williams is being honored tonight. But there's more. Professor Williams' teaching and commitment do not end when the hour is over. He is concerned with and dedicated to each of his students. And this dedication extends beyond the classroom, beyond office hours, to genuine interest in his students as people. The comments on the nomination ballots attest to this. One student wrote, "Professor Williams began our first lecture by convincing us that the purpose of a course is to learn, not to impose as much stress as possible upon the students. He even said that if we were ever having problems that we should call him and say, 'Williams, I'm going down.'" Students appreciate nothing as much as professors who recognize them as individuals, with individual thoughts, concerns, and problems. Williams is ever aware of his students, and he makes an effort to meet as many as he can. All of Williams' students are touched in some way by this special professor. One student wrote, "I encourage all who attend this university to take any of his classes. You will appreciate the gift of life more and be a better person because of it. I know I am." Professor Williams, we are honored to present you with the 1992 Golden Apple Award for Outstanding Undergraduate Teaching. And one last reason is that tonight, in the midst of everybody else who was upset that things were going wrong, Professor Williams fixed his own slide projector. And as one of your nominators wrote, such talent on the part of a professor, such as that of Professor Williams, should never go unrecognized. We at the Shout Board could not agree more.
Just a moment. My very warmest thanks. My thanks to those who have introduced me, to Lan, to Shira, to my colleague George Bornstein, to Michael Brooks. Where are you, Michael? You're there, thank you. It's a joy to be here, a rich welcome to you. And to those, by the way, who have been putting up those wonderful posters. Thank you, and I wish my mom could have seen it. She would have been proud and thought the university had done well. A colleague of mine this morning was walking down the hall, actually, in Mason, and I put my hand on his shoulder, and he turned round and he turned white and said, "The poster's come to life! I can't get away from it!" Anyway, I chose to entitle this last lecture, "The Romance of the University." I'll try to justify that title as the evening goes on. There are subparts to the lecture, however, and they go thus. Number one. Number one, the twofold word. Number two, the twofold beauty. Number three, the twofold truth. And number four, the romance of the university. And here we go. In Western thought, which is the area of human inquiry that I know best, we are proud of our knowledge. The desire for that knowledge has brought you here, and as I'll be speaking in the last part of my lecture, it brought me here. I've had the unusual opportunity over these years, a lad from the central part of Ontario then, along with you, lads and lasses from all over the world, to talk about our stories. Their stories are varied, and as they come against one another, they sometimes are not only different, but they seem contradictory, difficult to inhabit the same mental world. And I'd like to talk about the experience of that with you for a few moments. The twofold word. At the heart of our culture, then, a deep sense that not only may we know, but but there are crucial things which we do not know and need desperately to know if we are to act as we should. The first part of what I'm going to be doing then is to talk about the intersection of knowledge and action, and the haunting specter which is there, that we may in fact never know enough to act when and as we should. Before we enter that, one more word about the whole structure of things for tonight. As I conceive this, I want to make some way of signaling to you people whom I love that what is in my mind is not simply the construct of my activity, but in part your gift. And for those of you here, I tried to reconstruct those sorts of texts on which we've touched together over these last few years. And you will be hearing individually some of those. And I hope that when you hear them, you will say, in a sense, that's our song. And I should like you then to be thinking about what you have done with those thoughts since then, and to observe what my mind has been doing in response to your ideas, and then what we have created together at this university will be, for me, the point of celebration tonight. That which has come as our minds have jointly been in action. And then finally, on that, I should like to have you listen for these few minutes and listen to the weave of all those disparate parts as they come together on this evening here before you in my mind. And then please respond. Come round and see me. Tell me what your thoughts are. That haunting specter then. And the text, Oedipus Rex, Oedipus the king. You know the story. He is called in the opening speech, Klenos Oedipus, Oedipus the Briton. He's a man who has everything. Rule, family, a beautiful wife, children, a city, and he's a witty man. You know the sort of man he is. He's the sort that many of us look at and say, how do they do that? Because when they see 2 or 3 facts, immediately their minds go, and they make a solution straight away. They're great at riddles. This is Oedipus, he who solved the riddle of the Sphinx. He who can tell us what we are, the mind piercing through just like that. This is brilliant Oedipus. His city in disaster. And brilliant Oedipus, just the man to solve the mystery, because from Delphi has come an oracle. And you know how the gods are. They are obscure. And the oracle is riddling, and Oedipus thinks he must get to the heart of this straightway, and he uses his massive intelligence, sharp, piercing wit, to get there. The search is for someone who murdered, for, hang on to this word please, violence in the city. We'll be back to that word during the course of these next few minutes. As he does, he has an argument with his brother-in-law, Creon. Creon. Oh, Oedipus knows how to solve a mystery. Creon's nearer the throne than Oedipus is. He should be ruling and not Oedipus. He is Oedipus' competitor, is he not? And he's been off to Delphi, and he brought the oracle back. And the oracle seems to say that perhaps Oedipus is involved. Maybe just Oedipus is involved. He knows he can't be involved, and he smells a rat. He knows Creon wants the throne. Creon has conspired with the oracle. Creon is behind the chicane and wreck. Creon, trying to tease him out of this, says, but what if you do not understand? And Oedipus delivers one of the great lines in all of world literature. Hang on to it. I may not understand, but rule I must. Which is to say, I may not have all the facts in my command, hard as I can try, but I have to act. And what Oedipus discovers then question, who is behind the murder? The murderer of lives. He discovers finally that he is talking with the shepherd. On the point, says he, of fearful hearing. Says the shepherd, I am going to tell you the story of a lad and his origins, who has now come full circle. And Oedipus says, oh God, I'm on the point of fearful hearing, but here I must. To great Gerundus, I must act, and I must hear. And the story which he hears is that in fact there was a gulf between his knowing and his acting. Between his knowing he was not the man, and the curse it provides on the man who did it, and the knowing that he is the man. And now comes the terror. You, we, for we are all Oedipus, may find ourselves forced with the necessity to act, and act in such a way as to impinge on the lives of all in touch with us. And we may not know enough to act, and what we do not know is ourselves. The Oracle of Delphi. There is an inscription there which haunts Western literature again, haunts it as an ideal. Gnothes auton, know yourself. Oh, Oedipus. And he ends the play with the chorus saying, Dyste nos Oedipus, O Oedipus the wretch. That is all that I can call you. There is another play. The play which follows on this, Oedipus Colonis. Any of you read it? Say a few of you have. In which, in winding ways, the old man Oedipus nears his end. And as he does, he comes to a city, Athens, a little deme actually outside the name of Colonus. And there, the haunted old man, impure, untouchable, a man in exile, a man who did not know himself, is shunned by the citizens. He has the stench of the exile on him and of one who is involved in violence of all is it? You're the one who set up this deed, but mine the hand that did it. Do you ever find yourself the agent of an action that you didn't know you were undertaking? You knew you were doing the gesture, but you didn't know what the action was. Then you've been Oedipus, and I'm sorry to be the first to tell you if you haven't, that before life goes on very much longer, you will. Then comes one man to see us, and he responds to Oedipus in what to me are some of the most soaring words ever done. Simple, quiet words. I will take you in, Oedipus. I know what it is to be an exile. I have been an exile too. And this is the turn, good friends, which moves this whole cycle from comedy to tragedy to romance. And I'll return at the end of this hour to that romance now of the university, and it goes thus generically. Oedipus rises from humble origins to great felicity, from a hard start left out on a mountain to being king of the place. That is comedy. And Kleanos Oedipus, Oedipus the brilliant, becomes Oedipus the wretched, and that is tragedy. The ending of his life is one in ways beyond his foreseeing. He is drawn up and made a blessing to the place where he will die. And the place where he dies is Athens. And he dies there. For now now, tonight, for the rest of your lives, I beg you hang on to this. Because of one person who looked and said, "You are not, to me, polluted. At least not so that I cannot receive you. You are the other, but I know what it is to be an exile too. I will take you in. I know I'm a man. I have nothing more to hope for in the end than you have, Oedipus. And that, good friends, that is the turn to romance, which one should love to see embodied in society. A turn, a return to a constant joy for which the fulcrum is human acceptance. I'm only a man. You are a human. I have no more to hope for in the end than you have. One word, says Oedipus, makes all this worthwhile. That word is philia. That word is love. In that play is scanned a new understanding of what holds human community together. New in the Greek story system, not the philia of bloodlines, not the philia of those who lived in a place, but the philia which says, I am only a man. Wherever you were born, whatever your blood, I have no more to hope for in the end than you do. You're an exile. I know what that feels like. Come. It is a gesture, I don't know how these things go together. It is a gesture which is replicated in its own way, in what to me is, again, one of the more moving impulses ethically in Western, Eastern and Western thought, and I refer to Tanakh at this time. The source of ethical obligation is the ever transmitted through the generations' memory. We were slaves in Egypt. If you were ever a slave, this text says, remember it. Don't elide it at the moment of prosperity. Say it, because others will be there. Remember, knowing what injustice is. Keep that as the constantly renewed cultural source of decency, of justice. To be in exile, to live history, not as comedy, not as tragedy, but willed romance. One more slight point on this. In the modern age, we take a different turn on this problem of knowledge, do we not? How many of you have read Hamlet? Oh, lovely. Look at it. It's going to make sense here. Hang on. Go back and love these texts. Thus, in Hamlet, the problem is not so much, well, it is the problem of knowledge, that we may have to act and never know enough. The problem is one which haunts the modern world and is going to haunt the third part of my lecture tonight. It is that in order to act, we may want perfect knowledge. One of the characteristic phrases of Hamlet is a not perfect conscience, says he at one point. And he presses, and he will not act against corruption because there is just the slightest possibility that the great lie told by someone else may just be right. Maybe everything he knows is wrong. Maybe he hasn't got it right. He wants perfect knowledge before he will act. And Hamlet goes on, and people die and die and die until he brings himself to act. And in some ways, this cuts close for me to the great tragedy of my own century, to which I'll be referring in the third part of the lecture. My century, Holocaust. What do you need to know before you act? Number 2, the twofold beauty. I love words. I love images. We're going to see a few in a moment. I love them with a passion. I want you to as well. Most of you have, by now, sharper senses than I do even. You hear a little better. I just turned 50. You smell a little better. Things touch with greater tact. You see a little more sharply. Enjoy that. When I was a lad, even younger than most of you, a young lad, what did I know in Canada? I must have been about 12 years old. I ran across a poem. It went something like this. It's not the world's best poem. Professor Bornstein will wince when he hears it. It's lovely on the ear, but not so fine for the mind, maybe. But it went something like this. Very old are the woods, and the buds that break out of the briar's boughs when March winds wane. So old with their beauty are, oh, no man knows through what wild centuries rose back the rose. Very old are the brooks, and the rills that rise when snow sleeps cold beneath an azure sky tell such a history of come and gone. Their every drop is as wise as solemn. Very old are we men. Our dreams, our tales told in dim eves by Eve's nightingales. We wake and whisper a while, but the day gone by, silence and sleep, like fields of amaranth lie. It's a little poem by Walter de la Mare, but I decided on hearing that I loved words. They are, to my ear still, splendidly beautiful. Secondly, just to delight your ear, a poem by John Donne. I shan't do all of it, I promise. I call it the tuning of the eye. John Donne figures himself at the point of death. Listen for the I sounds. And remember that in Elizabethan pronunciation, the word joy, J-O-Y, was pronounced jai. Since I come to that holy room, where with thy choir of saints forevermore I shall be made thy music. As I come, I tune my instrument here at the door, and what I must do then, think here before. Whilst my physicians by their law are grown cosmographers, either man on this black bed do lie, that by them may be shown that this is my southwest discover I, hair Frasian fabrics, by these straits to die. I jai that in these straits I find my west. Wonderful, isn't it? The tuning of the eye, the tuning of the instrument. But did you hear that splendid turn on the eye? The whole paradox of the poem opens up. To die, I jai. How can that be possible? How can one rhyme death, die, and jai? Read the rest of the poem. Beauty. And whatever else you make of these poems, I implore you, and with I'm going to show you in a moment, I implore you to love the sensuous surface of them. I could do another reading of those poems. I could say to you, there are suspect tendencies in those, and there are. Did you notice, very old are we men? Does that sound male-centered to you? Rather than very old are we dudes. And did you notice that what was there in Eden was Eve's nightingales? Any of you hear the story of Procne and Philomela? How did Eve have nightingales? And you remember the story of rape, and the nightingale sings over and over again the story of her rape? Is this in the Garden of Eden? And our minds must go those ways. For objects of beauty also signify. And so after the semicolon part of this section was not only the twofold beauty, but here we are, the matter of ideology. Those things of beauty draw us to themselves. And they draw us in, and we want to examine their meanings for our lives. And we should, and I will with you. But plead from old Williams, enter into those texts, whatever the grounds, and we'll see further in a moment, as into a world of thought. It is easy to take the beauty, or not to take the beauty, but simply to chide the works for not being us. And since it is my understanding that truly to understand a work is to enter, as Hegel would say, into its interior life, and not to condemn it simply for being wrong, a plea from me. Receive the beauty, problematic as it is, compelling from the generations which have gone before. Enter fully into its life, absorb it into yourself, and then judge. Do not give over the matter of judgment. But if we are not simply to chide the past, to wish to kill our ancestors for not being us, then I plead, enjoy, enter into the life, learn from the life, and you will find plenty of space, I do, to say, no, I'd like us to do better. Could I for a moment then take down the lights and try some slides? Lovely, thanks. All right, I'm going to pass just a few images by you. I'm not going to do a full explanation of, how I'd love to. Okay, most of you will recognize this one. It is a portion, at any rate, of the Primavera, spring of Botticelli. On the right, and that is where I wish you to look, is what to me is deeply significant of art. This is beautiful, by the way, is it not? You love Botticelli, do you not? Yay? Yay. All right, there we are. Now, what you see, what you don't see on the right, I hope you will see later, is an image of a downcoming male figure pursuing a diaphanously clad female figure who metamorphoses into this figure on the far right, one of the most beautiful in all of art, the figure of Flora, the spring. This is an essay in desire, and I'll explore that a little further. But look at the sensuous beauty which is there. The beauty of both male and female forms, set in that incredible spring. What the work is after is this, when everyone thinks of its ideology, and it is Neoplatonic, that under the force of desire, the breath of desire, the virginal turns florid, turns into the spring itself, a metaphysical impulse burgeoning through human desire, makes our world the thing of beauty that it is. And at the center of the work is Venus, figure of love herself, or in their world, is it the Virgin Mary? But she's pregnant. What is this? This is to try to bring together two worlds of discourse. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And she, is it Mary, is it Venus, is blessing as her son, Cupid, love. But what about love? Mary, love, Cupid, Venus, love. As she, as Cupid, is shooting a flaming arrow. And then the three females. Not all of them caught up in desire for the male. One of them, perhaps, wishing chastity, another wishing to stay within her own sexuality, perhaps, but then one of them caught by the dark and looking over at the Mercury figure, the male figure, Mercury, the guide of souls to the land of the dead, Mercury, the figure of words, and here's the point, what Mercury does is wave or lift his wand, and he touches a cloud and makes it diaphanous. There it is. For his wand is Botticelli's paintbrush. And what Botticelli does is take pigment on wood and moving it through the opacity of that matter makes it lucent with his thought. And the urging there for all of you is to enter into that cycle of desire as you will. But that gesture leads you out of the painting. And the suggestion is that you emerge from this painting, have used it up, and go on and realize the high truths which the painting embodies, and yet the painting draws you back to itself, and back to itself, and back to itself. The twofold beauty, then, the beauty of the sensuous surface which draws us to itself and may seem to be an end in itself, caught as we are in the cycle of matter and desire. And the thrust of the wand, the thrust of the work of art, this one suggesting leave the world of matter, think only high thoughts, go to the ideas, and you are caught between the two. And the plea from old Father Williams, inhabit both. Inhabit both as lovers of that sensuous surface, and let your mind soar or sink, if it will, and examine the meaning of it and judge the meaning of it, and do not give over either part of that twofold beauty, the beauty of the sensuous surface and the thrust of the mind. One more or two more, please. Could you look at the richness of that world of the florid? Please. Hello. There the blessing of the maternal virginal as it scanned in this work, and oh, it's that ideology scan, as it raises its hand over and blesses this world of desire immaculate. Then the return out of that world. One or two more images. The famous one, the birth of Venus. The violence of male desire. Son castrating father. You see that beautiful foam on the ocean? It is the sperm of the father who has been castrated. His genitalia flung into the ocean according to the Hesiodic story give rise to Venus herself, the male, the female principle, and she is coming to shore. And the notion is that you are privileged observers, because beauty, as it is in itself, is about to be clothed, as you could see over on the right, with a garment, and you will never, after this moment, see beauty in itself, as it is, naked. Naked in its absolute purity. For you are seed, idea. But notice, say you, notice the gendering of this, and that's true. I hope your mind goes to that. Notice that it is the female body which is displayed to the conoscenti of the Medici group at Castello as they look on her as an emblem of desire. look at the beauty and judge. One more image now. Could you take that down a little? I wonder if you can. See? There we go. This will be the last of the images that I show you. Mary Magdalene of Donatella, 1440s. One of the haunting images in my mind. She is a woman like Venus of golden hair. What you're seeing as her covering is her golden hair. Question. What is the best way for one to live? For here is a twofold story about beauty. Is beauty, in fact, the beauty of that marble-like flesh of the Venus, whom to see is to admire or desire? Or is it the beauty of spirit, here rendered, which in this woman has burned, 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 and burned out the body, so that what is left is an ascetic shell? The candle of the spirit of that woman, according to the story, a beautiful, beautiful woman in her youth, she turning ascetic, wishing no more commerce with her own flesh, wishing only to get ready for a life after death, has so hollowed out that body that its gauntness haunts you. She is beautiful. I hope you go to see the statue someday. But I hope you realize that what Donatello is talking about is not only the achievement of spirituality, but oh, the cost. Oh, the cost. The Venus, the Mary Magdalene, two differing stories. Your choosing. The twofold story about beauty. Thank you. Would you return the lights, please? Now, the twofold truth. And here, if you will, is very close to the heart of what I wish to tell you tonight. It goes thus. This is my century, as I mentioned to you, the 20th century. And in many ways, I'm not proud of it. I'm going to speak to you more personally now than one normally does on these occasions, because I care for you. And because if this were my last lecture, I would break decorum and speak with you thus. I am not proud of my century. Not a century with the First World War, not a century with the Depression, not a century with Holocaust, not a century with the Second World War, and with the Korean War, and with the Vietnam War, and with Cambodia, and with Iraq, and on and on. In the catalogue of centuries, this is in many ways monstrous. And at the end of this century, we find ourselves very frequently in my field with a philosophy of language and truth, which suggests finally that language has no stable meaning. I am meaning Derrida and deconstruction and all that. Yes, I am. And you know, it is, I think, a philosophical, logical truth. I know of no way in which I can lead you through logical maneuvers to a surety of stability of meaning. And I don't know anyone who can. And an implicate of that, which is frequently taken, is that we can't communicate at all. That we are tied up in our own subjectivity. That we can't make moral judgments. That everything is irresistibly and absolutely stable. may be a logical truth, and I have bent my mind with others to try to see if it is. I think it probably is. But secondly, and here I am, I don't think it matters much to action, because if it is logically true, its chief implicant is modesty. Modesty in making judgments. But it is a disaster if it inhibits you from making judgments. You may not be, I told you I'd return, you may not be able to come to perfect conscience, but you have to act. And if you wait until you get stable meanings, a la Derrida, impossible, you will never act, and you will never resist social injustice. And to take Oedipus' phrase, arte on death, act or rule you must and you will. And for me, in my century, perhaps the defining series of events is, in fact, Holocaust. I can never know our tradition the same thereafter. Because what one finds with that, the best my mind can come to terms with it, is that in fact, one cannot trust the whole humanistic tradition. One cannot trust whatever does to compel decency. And that as a matter of fact, there is another reading about us. That reading is that we are capable, we humans, of the most profound and degrading indecencies against others. Primo Levi, about whom I'm studying with many of you, ends one of his works, The Truce, with a dream which haunts his consciousness, which expresses this sense that the reality which we know, the comfortable reality, after all, gives open on another reality, and we cannot know which we are essentially. We cannot arrive at the logical truth of what humanity is. I had a dream. It was a dream among other dreams. It was various in its particulars, but it was unique in its substance. I'm at the table with my family and with friends and at work. Or I'm in a green countryside in an ambience in sort which is placid and easy, apparently free of tension and fear. But I fear a subtle anguish and a profound one. Primo Levi, who lived through the camp at Auschwitz, the definite sensation of menace, a menace which is coming upon me. And in fact, as the dream proceeds, little by little or brutally, every time in a diverse manner, everything falls away inside me, the scene, the walls, the persons at table with me, and the anguish becomes more intense and more precise. Everything now is in chaos. I'm at the center of a gray and turbid nothing, and look, I know what this signifies. And again, I know that I have always known it. I am again in the camp, in Lager, and nothing was true outside the Lager. The rest of life was a brief vacation, or a cheating of the senses, a dream, family, nature, in flower, home. And now this entire dream, the dream of peace, is finished. And in the external dream, which goes on, oh, I hear resonate a voice, and it's a well-known one. A single word, not imperious, but it's free. It is the command of mourning in Auschwitz, a command in a foreign language, feared and waited for. Wake up. Stavach. The train appears in Lady's dreams frequently. I am at home, says he. Suddenly I am no longer home. I hear a train whistle, and I am in the station, and others of the Jews in my city are with me. And the train whistle blows, and I must get on, and out in the darkness are the lords of death. I can bring you no logical comfort that we are essentially incapable of that, excepting if we're monsters. Those are twofold words about reality. And if anything, Auschwitz has shown us capable of producing both those realities, whatever we think beyond that to which we should be true. It is for this reason that with you I plead, listen to Primo Levi on this. I have heard, says he, that there is a theory much abroad in this century that one cannot communicate. One can. We're humans. We're sociable. We're born for this. And if it may be the case that we miss subtleties, I know a cry of pain. That can be communicated. And when someone says violence, that can be understood. And no subtleties about the impossibility of communicating meaning should stop one from saying, stop violence. We know what that means. And no theories that language is just noise should ever stop you from understanding that even in the absence of perfect conscience about language, you can act with deep humanity to stop violence. Thresholds. That will do it. Thresholds. Two stories that I have spoken of with you, and one from the reminiscence from Primo Levi. Threshold, Auschwitz. Threshold inscription over the gate of Auschwitz. Arbeit macht frei. Work makes free. It is alive for the camp. And at that point, good friends, irony stops. Double meanings should stop, and you forgive me. I speak frankly. I employ, say, lie. Because for those who enter, work does not make free. And the inscription which is behind that inscription is, the truth will make you free, and there is no truth there, and one needs to say it then and now. Secondly, our urgencies are very strong. A phrase from the story of Sodom. You know the story. A resident alien takes in guests. And all of the peoples of the city come, all the men, and say, send out that man. We want to rape him. This is a story of violence. And the host refuses and says, I have my 2 daughters here. I'll put them out. Do with them what you want to. Only don't touch this guest of mine. Oh, do I want to question that world and its values? But what I want to focus on is that threshold, that door again. Because as the story proceeds, the story is that those miraculous beings inside struck with blindness those outside. And you would think, would you not, that they would stop? And they don't. The passage says they groped blindly at the door, still wanting to get in. What does it take to stop brutality? And the word is that of itself, when it is afoot, it does not. Last of these stories of thresholds, the crime at Gibeah, which knows these earlier stories and redoes it. A man has an argument with his wife. She goes home. And at home, she stays for about 4 months. It must have been some argument. After 4 months, the man decides he wants the woman back, and he comes for her. And the father and he have a male bonding ritual, it looks, for about 4 or 5 days. They feast together. Every day the man saying, I'm going to go, and the father saying, no, go, stay on for a while, won't you? We'll eat, we'll drink, we'll feast. And finally the man says, I will. And he starts home with his wife and a servant. And they go and they say, let's go into Jebus tonight. No, that's not one of us. Let's go on to a city of our own. And they go to Gibeah, the city of Benjamin, and hence an ironic phrase, safe in Benjamin. A resident alien is the only one to take them in. First break of hospitality. No one takes them in. And then, in a reprise of the Sodom story, thresholds again. The men once more of Gibeah come and say, send that man out, we want to rape him. And the man inside says, no, don't do this to this man. Notice gendering again. Oh, how I should like to talk with people of this day. But I do have my own daughter who has never known a man, and I have his concubine, and we'll put them out to you and do with them what you want. And the response is, no, send him out. And the man takes his wife, who he has just gotten back, and pushes her out the door and closes it. They rape her, gang rape her, all night long. And in the morning, she comes toward the threshold. And when the man opens the door in the morning, he looks down. Remember this image. And her hand is on the threshold. And he looks down and he says, get up. Let us be going. And she does not reply, for she is dead. Thresholds. Violence. And in this story, it's not only the men outside, it's the men inside who one needs to question. What was that man doing the night long as his wife was being raped outside? What was the other woman in the room doing that night as she was being raped outside? Thresholds, images, growing urges, hand on threshold, and maxim from old Williams. When all one's urgencies, and even, remember the earlier part of the discourse, all one's truths point to abusing the other as other. Shout violence and stop it if you can. Whenever your truths or your urgencies lead you to abuse or use the other, simply as uttered. Shout violence and stop, or see that it's stopped. The romance of the university. I'm a lad from Central Ontario. This is a multiversity. It is the multiple university. And with all of its flaws, which I think of to be many, it is a place of wonder to me. I could, at this point, you may imagine, put on an academic robe. The purpose of that would be to indicate to you that this institution brings you and me together and gives me the possibility of having a projectionist there and slides here and a library there and classrooms, and to have the multiple you spend part of your lives with me discussing what means most to us. You didn't come to this university to hear Ralph Williams. You didn't know about me. I didn't know about you. And we found one another here. And that, for me, is joy. The multiple university. And it gives us for a while, as an institution, possibilities which, as an individual, a sort of magic, if you will, which I would never have otherwise, the ability to snap my fingers, and on comes one of the world's great pieces of art. The ability to speak to you out of our present experience and to have you say, I can hear these years, that's our song. And one day, and this is the picture of that day, I will lose that magic because I will leave this institution. I don't look forward to that day in many ways. It will be a day, in a certain sense, of course, of freedom. But it will be a freedom which is deeply ambiguous, and in which I will lose a vast deal. Let me, in closing, return to the romance of the university. When I die, as I will, I should like one phrase to encapsulate what I should like to have tried to be. It's a phrase from the greatest of all poets, Dante. And it is the way in which he sums up the two parts of human nature in one line. It goes, intellectual light, full of love. I should like that. I should like to achieve something within the universe of that for and with me. At the end of the play, The Tempest, Prospero adds to the book. It does so, having created around him a romance. A romance in which he has used his powers, such as they are, those extensions, those abilities to snap and produce images, to bring tragedy to romance through a cycle of humility and forgiveness, and at last, the renunciation of those powers. The great speeches in The Tempest are well known, but one of my favorites, on which I reflect a great deal, is a little speech at the end, in which, stepping forward, he speaks to those who have watched the play, which he has with them and for them created. And taking off his robe, and setting it aside, having set on their way the younger generation in law, he speaks, and it goes thus. Now, my charms are all mine own, and what strength I have's mine own, which is most vain. Now 'tis true, I must be here confined by you, or else to name send. Let me not, since I have my dukedom gotten, pardon my offenders. Dwell on this fair island by your spell, but release me from my bands with the help of your good hands. Breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. Now I want spirits to repose, arts to be child. My end must be despair, unless I be relieved by prayer, which pierces so that it assaults heaven itself and frees all faults. As you from crimes would pardon me, let your indulgence